I see a few attendees coming in now. Hi, everybody. Hi, Drew. Hi, Ellen, Jane, Margaret. Welcome, welcome. Martin, Matthias, Neve. You're all very, very welcome. We'll be kicking off shortly. Welcome, Sean. Hi, Viv. Hi, Paul. Hi, everybody. Okay, so people are just trickling in there and we'll kick off in 30 seconds. Okay, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion today on the role of leadership in workplace well-being. I'm joined today by Brian Crooke and Adele Grazi, and I'll ask you guys to individually introduce yourselves in a moment. But just before we do, I just wanted to say a warm welcome to everybody who's joined us online, everybody who's in attendance in this session, but also anybody who's tuned in across our streaming platforms, or anyone who might view this video at a later stage. You're all really, really welcome. So a quick round the room, the virtual room. So my name is Dan Rogers. I'm head of education in Tangent, which is Trinity's Ideas Space, the innovation hub at Trinity College. We deliver a variety of innovation entrepreneurship programs at the undergraduate and postgraduate level, including a postgraduate certificate in workplace wellness, which we'll talk a little bit more about over the course of the discussion today. And I might go to yourself, Dr. Adele Grazi. Perhaps you could introduce yourself, please.
Yes, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Adele, and I am an assistant professor in Trinity College in the psychology department, specifically in the Center of Innovative Human Systems. My background is in organizational psychology, and I have been teaching well-being in organizations for a while now. Thank you for joining the roundtable.
Super, thanks, Adele. And Brian.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, hi, everybody. So Brian is my name. I'm on the postgrad. I lead a postgrad with Adele in Workplace Wellness at Tangent. I lead on modules 1 and 3. It's the fundamentals of workplace wellness and project and policy implementation. And as well as that, I run a community called Workplace Wellbeing Ireland. So we've over 4,000 members, and we try and we just share information around workplace wellbeing, workplace health promotion in Ireland. And in my spare time, I also lead a social enterprise. So with Park Hit, the big, hairy, audacious goal is to bring free resistance training to every county and community in Ireland. So between all of that, 2 kids as well, it keeps me out of trouble.
Great stuff. Thanks, Brian. Brilliant. So we're going to chat about the role of leadership in workplace well-being. And just as we go through the session for the next kind of 40 minutes, if anybody in any of the attendees have any questions, please just drop them into the chat, and we'll pick them up as we go. But please, if we can keep this interactive, let's do that. So do drop in questions if you have any. So Ireland's National Workplace Wellbeing Day happened recently on Friday, April 28th. I believe that's now in its ninth year running. Is that correct, guys? Something like that. And I suppose this day celebrates the importance of employee well-being across a wide variety of industries and well-being culture. I'm wondering, maybe just to kick off, maybe we could probe that a little bit. What do we mean when we talk about well-being culture in an organizational context? And I might come to yourself, Brian, for that.
Sure, yeah. So I remember I first came across well-being culture, or culture of health. It was Professor Ron Getzel talking about it. He's got an excellent 2016 paper where he effectively defines this or speaks about it. It's any environment or culture that places a value on employee well-being, but not only placing a value on it, that it's supportive and it's conducive of that well-being of that employee, those employees, participating in whatever it is that organization is involved in. So it's one thing to provide services talks, sessions? Is it a gym on site? Is it workshops, healthy nutrition options? But then it's another thing having an environment that actually supports people being able to avail of those services and those supports. So that would, for me, encapsulates that overall culture of health, where the healthy option is the easy option.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, and I suppose adding to what just Brian said there, it's also, if we think about well-being as dimensions, you know, the job, let's say, of an organization is to try and create well-being, you know, in all different dimensions. So that would be like the physical, you know, dimension of well-being for employees, the emotional, the psychological, the financial, the career aspect, you know, of well-being. So it's looking at all the different areas of well-being that need to be taken into account.
And I imagine this can have a huge impact on job satisfaction for employees. Would that be the case?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it has been shown by research that employees that, you know, have a high well-being within organizations, they tend to be, you know, more satisfied. There's a lot less absenteeism. There's less presenteeism within organizations. So yeah, it definitely benefits organizations in levels of innovation and creativity as well.
Sure, and I imagine retention perhaps also.
Yeah, of course.
Great, and so I hear this term sometimes, a well-being intervention, and I'm never entirely sure what it means. So in a sort of organizational setting, what is a well-being intervention, right?
I think the term probably comes from the world of occupational health. So like it's quite a clinical term, but effectively a well-being intervention is anything. It could be anything from a class, a workshop, you know, something, a one-off initiative, right the way up to a company policy, a flexible working policy, a parental leave policy, and then it's anything in between. So it's anything that supports or promotes healthy behaviors, healthy outcomes within the workplace. The one thing I would say about interventions is, one thing we try and do on the postgrad in Trinity is try to discourage what I do see an awful lot of is people and companies engaging in random acts of wellness, or just random interventions layered on top of each other. What we try and do is push the focus to all the groundwork that can be done before even choosing an intervention. So effectively, it's through leadership support, creating a shared ownership for well-being, gathering meaningful data around well-being, crafting that in the well-being operating plan, and then, you know, the interventions should almost be choosing themselves. They're really well-informed interventions, as opposed to just something that the well-meaning well-being leader thinks will be, you know, a nice to have for the organization.
Okay, that's really interesting. So perhaps the what you might call the random acts wouldn't be as maybe helpful over the long term as a more strategic approach. Is that the case?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they're fine in the short term, and I'm sure they make for a nice photo when you get that former rugby player in for the 1 hour resilience talk, which supposedly has made the whole employee population resilient in the space of an hour. But effectively, it's not going to lead to any long-term benefits. Whereas, you know, the long-term strategic approach is, as I've just outlined, as we try and focus on in the program.
Okay. And Adele, Brian just mentioned leaders there, and obviously we're looking at leadership specifically here in the context of well-being, and leaders who have so much influence within an organizational setting, leaders and managers, I imagine also. So what is the role of people in leadership positions, let's say, in creating this culture of workplace well-being?
Well, I think their role is fundamental. I mean, they impact the whole culture of an organization. So when we talk about organizational culture, we are kind of talking about the underlying values, and within organization, underlying beliefs that we're not really taught. We're not told about this, you know, norms that are within an organization. It's something that we learn while we're working within the organization, and leaders are the ones creating this culture, and hopefully a culture of well-being. So the role of leaders is, you know, like what Brian was saying, is not to create these interventions that happen here and there, but it's more trying to create a culture of well-being where individuals might feel that they can, for example, feel safe to speak up within the organization. That's what, in psychology we call psychological safety. And that is, for example, a norm that is extremely important when it comes to well-being within an organization. And leaders can do this in a variety of ways. So, for example, they can do this through social learning theory. So social learning theory suggests that, leaders are role models. So we need to follow, what they need to be the ones that actually believe in that culture of well-being. So, if you don't want your employees to be working overtime, then you need as a leader not to be working overtime or be sending emails, after working hours, because otherwise you're breaking that culture of not sending emails after, 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whatever is, the policy that has been decided within the organization. So on the one side, it's role modeling. On the other side is rewarding your employees. A lot of the time, employees, when we think about organizations, we always think about monetary rewards. And I think obviously monetary rewards are something that people like, but sometimes we forget the importance of basic rewards as, saying thank you to your employees or highlighting that they did a great job for speaking up and actually bringing up an issue that, people, they weren't aware of. So when I say, speaking up, I don't mean that employees only have to say like nice things to leaders, but it's also that ability for employees to actually, be able to bring even really big issues to their leaders or whatever the issue is and feel safe to do so. And so leaders need to be able to, manage if there's conflict, manage that conflict in a healthy manner. And then we have, for example, social identity theory, which tells us that, people need to identify with a culture of an organization. And with that, what we mean is that the values that are within that organizational culture need to be in line with what employees feel, basically, in line with their own values. So this is really, really fundamental. So for example, a lot of employees might move from one organization to the other, not so much because the job might change, because the role is exactly the same, but they just move from one organization to the other because one organization has a work well-being culture that is a lot stronger than the other one. So that is something that people need to keep in mind. Leaders need to keep in mind that if they create an identity where, people feel that their values are in line with those of the organization, then retention is going to be a lot easier. People are going to be a lot happier to work with you, and so on.
It's really fascinating, Adele. I'm thinking in terms of the modeling well-being behaviors. That's a really interesting one, because I imagine a lot of leaders would find themselves in a position where they do need to go above and beyond, and sometimes that may set an example that isn't perhaps ideal in a well-being context for other employees. So I'm just wondering, how do they balance that? Are there recommendations around how leaders balance, I suppose, modeling good well-being behavior, but also acknowledging that they may need to deliver at another level given their position in the organization?
I'll jump in. Lee Yao, I don't know if you've seen this paper, Adele, there's an excellent paper only from 2021 where she talks about health promoting leadership and what's involved there. And she talks about how health awareness, how leaders, talking about or demonstrating health awareness, health motivation, health behaviors, then that's what encourages others in the organization to look after their own or take more notice of their own health awareness, motivation, and behaviors. I mean, if you think about it, if you can draw a line between what you're trying to do from a well-being perspective to the organization's objectives or the organization's vision, I mean, that's the key there. And that's where we can get well away from these random acts of wellness. So to balance that, if you can demonstrate that actually by working towards the well-being vision, so in other words, maybe it is, as Adele was talking about, you're creating more loyal employees, more satisfied employees, healthier employees that are in turn more productive employees, I mean, that's good for the organization's bottom line in the long term. So we can kind of draw that line between the organization's vision, mission, and values, and maybe we're deriving a well-being vision, mission, and values from that. So that's bringing everybody with us, especially the leadership team, and we're getting in behind that. So there's nothing kind of fluffy or random about this well-being stuff anymore. It's quite strategic. But working towards this well-being vision, we're actually working towards the organization's vision and the bottom line.
Okay. And I suppose on the behaviors of the leaders, I suppose simple things like, I mean, I think you were alluding to it, Adele, in terms of like sending emails. You know, emails can be scheduled so that people don't receive them, you know, after hours, so that actually, even if somebody does find themselves in a situation where they need to work over and above, but they, you know, they're not burdening their employees with receiving those emails outside of office hours. I find the whole area of aligning your personal values with the value of an organization, that's a fascinating one. How, any comments from anybody as to how you go about doing that? So if, you know, if you're, I suppose, how do you ensure that the values of an organization are aligned, you know, somewhat to your own personal values when seeking employment?
You could, if you're lucky enough, I suppose some organizations have taken the step to promote talk about their vision and their culture kind of upfront, if you like. I mean, HubSpot being the prime example. The HubSpot culture deck is quite famous. We actually talk about it on the course. Google it there, you'll see it. It's there for everyone to see. And even if you haven't already seen it, if you're applying for a position at HubSpot, long before you're invited for interview, you're sent a link to the culture deck and say, look, this is who we are and what we do and our expectations of you. This isn't for you, that's fine. Plenty of other organizations out there. So, you know in advance what's expected, what the culture is, that's the idea. And then you make the decision as an individual person, does this align with my values? Is this the type of organization I want to work with? And so I think more and more organizations are taking that approach where it's, you know, culture first, here's who we are and what we do. Do you align with that?
That's great. And companies that are willing to really go public with their culture are obviously really proud of it and really welcoming of people who feel that they might have an alignment to that. I'm going to take a
I saw that Anita has her hand up, but I just wanted to add one thing before. You need to keep in mind that organizations are in constant change. So another way to maintain that identity is by involving your staff into that change. So, you know, if there is areas of well-being that's, you know, not working well, or the environment might be impacting the organization. We saw that with COVID, for example. So it's kind of getting, you know, the leaders involving the staff and understanding, okay, what is it that you guys need from us? How can we support you? How can we help you? And that creates obviously a stronger identity, because it's the employee is getting involved in that process of creating maybe a new policy or creating, you know, new behaviors or norms that are needed within that organization.
Yeah, super.
Yeah, sorry, Anita.
Anita, you had your hand up there. Would you like to come in with a question? I see the hand has gone down, but I'm not sure if that's something that goes down after a period of time. Anita, are you there?
Easy to hit that by mistake as well.
could be the case. Feel free, Anita, to come back in if you wish to do so at any stage. Very good. So I wanted to touch on, I suppose, and maybe we could have touched on it at the outset, but the definitions around workplace well-being. It strikes me as an area that is vast and can possibly a lot of things fall into the area of workplace well-being. And I'm conscious there is a standard, Brian, associated with wellness, or as health at least, and wellness in the workplace. Is that something that guides the parameters around what is workplace well-being, or could you speak to that in any way?
Well, actually, in the very first session on the postgrad, we posed this question because, yeah, I mean, there is a definition out there, and we do reference that, we talk about it. But actually, what we do in the session one is we kind of almost trying to find what is workplace well-being, what does that mean to us as a group? You know, rather than have a definition forced upon us, let's come up with our own understanding of what that is. I mean, that's a really nice exercise to get involved with. I suppose to Adele's very first point, actually, though, while we usually the outcome of this is it's broad, and it means different things to different people. And if you can put that into a large organization, you imagine how many hundreds or thousands of people you have. can be quite challenging, to say the least. So having a little bit of structure around that can help. So we've kind of discussed what an intervention could be. I mean, that could be quite broad, but then the areas that you focus on could be quite broad as well. So maybe having some kind of structure around that is useful. Personally, I would lean towards the WHO. There are 3 pillars from wellbeing for a starting point. I think it goes back to 1948, physical, mental, social well-being. And then, I mean, look, what's going on at the moment, I think it's understandable that a lot of organizations will maybe have a 4th pillar, a financial pillar in there as well. And if you're doing something across each of those, I mean, I think that'll help give you some kind of structure for what you're doing.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Go ahead, Adele.
No, I was just trying to say that defining, as Brian was saying, it's so complex. And, as from a research point of view, when we look at well-being in the past, we have always looked at, outcomes such as job satisfaction or job engagement or motivation in employees. But this is, has radically changed throughout COVID times, and really, we're trying to create some measures of well-being that kind of look at all these different dimensions, because there's so many, and it gets even more complex, when we're looking at hybrid work and the gig economy. So it's kind of like there's so many layers to it that it becomes even more and more complex.
Sure. Paul, I see you have your hand up there. Paul, did you want to come in with a question?
Nope.
No. No problem.
Maybe if you use the chat, Paul or Anita, if anyone wants to post a question then as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Drop the questions into the chat. Very good. So I might come to you, Adele, on this one. So in terms of the tools and norms that leaders can use in the development of a workplace well-being culture, what would be typical of the kinds of norms that we might expect?
So the norms that, when we think about well-being, we tend to always we think more of individual well-being. So we look at nutrition for the employees, or we might look at, having a gym within the organization. But the reality is that organizational well-being is more really layers of the organizational culture and the different norms within that organizational culture. So one of the norms was exactly what I was talking about earlier, which is, for example, psychological safety. So it's that feeling safe to speak up within the organization. And again, that doesn't mean that you're only saying positive things about the organization, but that, conflict is allowed, basically. And conflict is allowed in a very safe environment where your ideas are being heard. Other norms that are important for a well-being culture is fairness. And we have very different, forms of fairness. I'm not going to go into it, but it's basically employees feeling that, everything is distributed in an equal manner throughout the organization. And that is not always easy, because different individuals have different needs. So every individual is unique. And it needs to be, it's the leader's decision, really, how they're going to manage those differences between one employee and the other. Someone might have kids and the other one might not have kids, but have an elderly parent. So how do you manage that? Somebody might have, a disability. So how do you manage that? So, the leader needs to really understand the differences between all the different employees. Also, some employees might want to really create a career within organizations, while others might not be that interested. So justice is all about that. And then there is, creating a sense of purpose, which I think is really fundamental. And it basically is not only about looking at the tasks that individuals have to do within the workplace. So, your routine within your working life, but it's kind of creating a sense of purpose that goes beyond that. And that can be anything. Some organizations, for example, will have sustainability as something that is their overall overarching organizational purpose. And for some organization, it should become, and I hope it becomes, well-being, so that the purpose of the end goal is that there is a well-being, and some organizations do that really nicely. Now that people don't have to travel because of hybrid work, a lot of them have developed, like, for example, community centers or community gardens where some of the employees go there and spend time together and create this garden. So, it's trying to create that sense of purpose that goes beyond the tasks in work. And then, Brian, can you think of other things?
So yeah, I mean, so organizations that are really leading by example in this area. I mean, I'm thinking it's the leadership piece, which we've spoken about. I think a huge piece then as well, if you drop down to maybe not quite from grassroots right the way up to leadership, is can you create a shared ownership for well-being across the organization? We don't want this to be, we don't want kind of the well-being program or the well-being strategy or these well-being interventions to be seen as just another management initiative or just another HR initiative that some may see as just designed to wring an extra percentage of productivity out of the workforce. Can we kind of really genuinely create a shared ownership for well-being? And a way to do that is to empower, is it a network of well-being champions or advocates, ambassadors, but whatever you want to call them. It's actually well-being innovators at Tangent, if I'm not mistaken. Dan is the name of the team. But this kind of shared ownership where the people on the ground alongside leadership are working on the ideas, the initiatives, the feedback loop is two-way. They're involved in the design, but they're also involved in the measurement. How are we measuring this? Are we making progress? Are we hitting all the different role types that Adele is talking about? Quite often a wellbeing program can be seen as just something for the office-based staff. What about the guys on the factory floor? What about the guys that are working on the 3G net, the 4G network and the masts, etc.? So are we hearing all those different voices, the parents, the non-parents, the shift workers, the part-time workers? Are we kind of, is this an all-inclusive program, or is it something that is just for a few? So how can we kind of create that shared ownership for what we're doing?
And Brian, I think you were about to mention some examples there, like what organizations, if we have people on the call, for example, who are working within organizations and they're wondering who are the leaders, internationally here, what organizations are really shining examples of how to do workplace well-being well?
I mean, there's quite a few in Ireland, and it's great to say. I wouldn't say anyone is. It's not something that you can say that's perfect and we're finished, we're done, because it's a continuous improvement process. Mm-hmm. But I look at the transport companies in Ireland that have actually invested in this over the last number of years. Each of them, let's say Irish Rail, Dublin Bus, Bus Éireann, now have at least one dedicated resource. In some cases, they have a couple dedicated to well-being, to the well-being of their staff, of their employees. And if you take Irish Rail as an example, and they very recently won the CIPD award, well-being award for a large employer. I mean, they really try and focus on, I mean, they've got the train drivers, obviously, engineers, kind of not your typical role types, if you like, not just your office-based workers. How can we look at initiatives that will support these different types of employees? So they've been really setting an example there, kind of an employee-led approach, if you like. And as it turns out, I know for a fact they do have well-being champions on the ground in each of those three transport companies as well. So not only do they have the dedicated resource, the leader, they also have that champion network, and they gather meaningful data then as well. What's working, what's not, and they're transparent about it as well. They say, look, we did our survey, here's the results, some positive stuff. There's a couple of areas we can work on as well. And they're sharing that back with colleagues, and they're improving as they go.
Great. And you mentioned the shared ownership, which I imagine is something that happens, and is built over time. What are some of the initial steps? So if a leader knows their organization needs to have more of a focus on workplace well-being, but they're not quite sure where to start, what are some of the steps that would be maybe a good start for them to take? And then what are some of the barriers that can arise and get in the way? Adele, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I was just noticing that Paul has his hand up again. I'm not sure if he wants to come in.
I think Paul's hand has been up, and he's
It's good to go.
yeah, he's welcome to. He's disappeared there for a second. We'll let him put his message in the chat if he wishes.
Yeah, but looking at that, something that I kind of think it's important to mention is the first thing that leaders need to do is look at themselves, really, because they're the ones that are going to have to create that change. And right now, when we talk about well-being, we talk a lot about ethical leadership. So it's about having traits, not traits, but more kind of behaviors around being compassionate and creating a sense of community, being empathetic towards your staff. So being a servant rather, than so kind of serving people rather than being served by people. So all those kind of behaviors or traits, whatever you want to call them, are really, really relevant. So first, leaders need to, and that's something that, they struggle within organizations because every leader or manager has different working styles. So you all kind of, the leadership team has to come together to actually decide, okay, how are we going to lead this? Are we going to go through an ethical manner? And what does that mean for us? Because it can be diverse for different leaders by themselves, but also different teams might need very different kind of leaders. So if you're talking about a team that, where, I don't know, for example, research teams, they might need a lot of flexibility, more flexibility than, I don't know, maybe accountant teams or whatever it is. So it's also about the kind of staff you have underneath you that you're leading. And then it's, I suppose, for me, an important step is actually understanding where the issues are for staff. So understanding, and that can be done through maybe, depending on how big the organization is, but if they're a big organization, then surveys are something that are fundamental, and trying to, kind of pinpoint what dimension of well-being is not working here. Where are our staff struggling? And so through surveys, you get those kind of answers, hopefully, because they are kind of anonymous. And then once you get those reports back, you can start looking at, okay, so how do we create this change? And what needs to be put in place to create this change? And the problem usually with change is that leaders are generally quite good in organization in creating a plan and starting to create that change. So they put trainings in place and maybe workshops and so on. But then when they fall back is in the last part of change, leaders tend to kind of, and this is just because we are human, it's not because they're bad leaders, that we all tend to fall back to our old behaviors. So, we all tend to do that. So it's important to push through that, so leaders are the one that needs really a lot of training, are the ones that really need support from each other between leaders to support that behavior throughout time, because it's not that easy to follow through. We all know how hard it is to change a behavior. It doesn't happen in a week. It might take months and months and months.
I love that. So there's an element of self-development necessary on the part of the leader in order for them to be able to effectively devise and implement a well-being campaign or well-being initiative within their organization, and also the sustaining of that sounds like that's where the hard work comes in, because for it not to be tokenistic, for it to be something that is lasting. Brian, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I just echo what Adele said there, and I think one of the biggest challenges is that we often hear, oh, these companies are just box ticking when it comes to well-being. But that's not the challenge. The challenge is that the leaders in those organizations haven't got a clue that they're box ticking. They think they're doing a fantastic job. So the challenge is to educate those leaders on what actually a sustainable well-being program looks like. So part of our role on the program, and as I say to all the students that come through the program, is our role is to educate our leaders on what that looks like, because I think there's a perception that it's, to the leader, I'll write that check, a small little wellbeing budget there this year. That's my work done now from a wellbeing perspective for the year. We've paid for the EAP program. I paid for those mental health first aiders, the 2 days, and our mental health is sorted now in the whole organization. So now we can kind of get back to work. Whereas there's so much more to it. It's participation, advocacy, visible advocacy, communicating in everything that we do, that where well-being is at the core of what we're all about, plus the allocation of resources, time, materials, and budget if budget is necessary. But budget is nearly the last thing you would consider. There's so much more before that. So it's that education piece for leaders that's really important.
And that's really interesting to hear. So budget typically isn't a barrier that presents, at least up front.
No.
Yeah,
definitely. Well, time is so much more important than budget. Now, I know we're going to get hit with the comments. Time is money, but it's just so much easier to allocate a little bit of time, someone's time, to something initially. And there's so many free resources out there. And actually, another challenge related to workplace wellbeing, as I see it, is I think again there's a perception out there that as wellbeing programs, wellbeing initiatives, interventions, they're always things that we need to attend, or something that's going to take time away from people that are already time poor. And that's where, again, programs fall flat on their face. People don't have time to attend these workshops, this training, whatever it is. Whereas, I mean, our whole wellbeing program, as we heard earlier, it could be a policy. It could be our flexible leave policy. It could be our right to disconnect policy. It could be no meetings on a Friday afternoon. We're giving people time back. If it's in our remit, it could be a finish early Friday, once a month, once a quarter. So here we are, we're actually giving people time back as opposed to, taking time away from people.
Absolutely. And I'm conscious, I mean, the world of work has changed dramatically in the last number of years, particularly during and post-pandemic. So I guess we see a whole hybrid working culture and remote working culture that didn't exist previously. What are the kinds of considerations that leaders might have with regard to employee well-being in that sort of hybrid context?
I suppose in the hybrid context, what we're finding is that it's really hard to create a culture or manage that culture because obviously some people are there physically and some people are remote. So it's trying to create, and some organizations do it successfully. It's not that because people are online that you cannot create a culture. You can, but it's trying to maintain that culture and that idea of inclusion. So at the moment, I am actually collecting data around well-being, and what I'm noticing is that people that are working remotely, when there are meetings, they tend to feel excluded compared to the ones that are face-to-face.
Yeah.
Which is kind of understandable because you're sitting there on the table with other people and the other maybe 3 or 4 team members are on a screen. So we need to think, we need to start thinking out of the box because this is new to all of us. I mean, I know remote working has been there for a while, but not, to this scale as we have it today. So it's how do we create inclusion for those workers? And also the problem is that when you're working remotely, a lot of the time we are multitasking. So you might be listening to a meeting, answering to emails at the same time. Maybe your phone rings, so you're looking at. So this is normal for everybody. We're all guilty of that. So how do you even stop that during meetings? And the reality is that emails just pop in constantly. So that is a constant distraction. So we need to start thinking out of the box of how this can change. And I think we're still in a learning process. We don't really know what is the right answer right now. We're still learning, and it's going to be, I think, a few years of trial and errors before we really understand how to manage this culture of hybrid work. And also like policy implementations, we still don't even know what the answer is. Is it that we all have to be in work the same days? Is it that we rotate? And then especially when we have new staff, how do people that are coming into an organization, how do we behave with them? Because obviously, as if you're starting off, you might feel isolated. You might not know who is who in the team, who you need to talk to if you have a problem. So do we take that staff and make them, work in the office for 3 months, 6 months? Or do we train them in a way that they're able to work hybridly? So we are still trying to understand, that process and what creates well-being, because obviously, somebody that starts in your organization, you don't want to stress them out from the beginning. So is it better for them to be in the office or not? But then, you might have a person that is starting off that has a disability and rather prefers to be at home. So how do you manage that with that specific person? So we still don't really know the answers. I think it's going to take time. Yeah, that's, I think,
Very
more or less
interesting,
where we're
very
at.
interesting. And it sounds like inclusivity is a key issue there in terms of ensuring that everybody is included as part of the workplace culture, whether they be online or in the office. Yeah, very, very interesting. Like, I'm conscious, even in our own unit here, we had staff members who joined during the pandemic, and it could have been 6 months before anybody met them in person, which would have been highly unusual situation. And I suppose you get to know somebody quite differently when you're just viewing them through the screen than you do if you're maybe chatting them over coffee or in the canteen, etc. The multiple competing vies for our attention is another interesting one that you mentioned there, Adele, because I think people might consider doing things in online meetings, such as writing emails, etc., that they would never do in an in-person meeting. So maybe there are some new norms that are, have developed there, which perhaps are not maybe ideal for us because we're splitting our attention in so many different ways, and possibly not doing any of the tasks to the optimum. Brian, did you want to come in at all there?
Well, just to say, I mean, understanding all those challenges that Adele mentioned, I think if you approach your well-being strategy from the perspective, or let's say using the framework that we use on the postgrad, you should still be capturing, the leadership buy-in is something you're looking for, that commitment, that alignment. You're still creating that shared ownership. You still should be gathering meaningful data. So you're still looking to hear from all those different voices in the organization, and the remote worker, the hybrid worker is just another one of those voices. So, you're still using the same framework. So the framework doesn't change. It's just maybe because of all this data you're gathering now, you realize you're maybe a lot more focus needs to be on those more inclusive interventions that Adele's mentioning. So, a finish early Friday is probably, doesn't really matter if you're in the office or online. That's going to be a finish early Friday for everybody. So I'm just thinking like a bit more creative maybe about your interventions and how you might support. Is it the whole entire workforce? Is it specific role types, and how you want to approach that?
Sure. So let's talk about the postgraduate certificate that we have here in Tangent in workplace wellness. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the kinds of applicants, the kinds of persona maybe that we might expect to apply for this course, a little bit about what students will learn on the course, and then maybe where people would go after.
Sure. Adele, do you want me to go?
Yeah, Brian, you go.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, I mean, I think we've what's been amazing about the program over the last number of years is the diverse mix of backgrounds, and that has actually got more diverse over the years. There was in our very first intake, there was probably a leaning towards let's say HR leaders. But in our last cohort, we've had such a wonderful mix. People from different parts, working in organizations, different parts of organizations, looking to maybe influence the well-being outcomes within their organizations. Anyone from, we had people in existing health and well-being roles in small to medium, large organizations, right the way through to the military were represented. I mean, the first female, the captain of ship in the Irish Navy was on the program. We also had a lot of people from individual backgrounds then as well, a smaller cohort who were interested in understanding how this works in an organization, and either maybe working for an organization in the future or working with an organization in the future. So it's quite a mix of backgrounds there. And yeah, we like I and the others on the program, I think, learned just as much from the student base than with the content then as well in the background. Like it was a fantastic, it was a really great program.
And in Tangent, I suppose we have a strong focus on the multidisciplinary sort of environment, the interactive teaching and learning. Can you tell us a little bit about what students can expect on the program?
So yeah, so we certainly, and from an assignment perspective, we try and make the assignments as practical as possible. So starting with module 1, we focus on, it was a focus on individual well-being initially to lay the foundation. Then we move up to having a what is well-being conversation. But the assignment for module 1 is to draft a business case for a well-being program or role at your organization. So, really, really practical. And we hope, and I've seen it in practice actually, that the students would take this back to their actual organizations, and then actually use it in the real world then as well. And that goes right the way through to module 3, where we actually invite host organizations to submit a real world challenge that they are facing. So effectively, the students' final project, their final module project, is they're working with an organization on a real world well-being challenge that they're facing, and then they're presenting their findings, their recommendations back to the host organization, along with an accompanying report.
Very good. And we see a rise in well-being related roles now in many of the corporates and other organizations also. Would you see graduates from this program potentially being eligible to apply for some of the roles that are now coming up?
Well, definitely, and that's one of their main reasons for taking the course. And I can see that already they're actively pursuing opportunities. You're right. There are more and more roles. So I have a weekly newsletter that I share every Tuesday morning, and I'm coming up on 2 years now, where every single week I've been able to share a new opportunity, a brand new. It's never going to be 100 new roles of this company. It'll be a role or 2 or 3 in companies, but almost every company is considering this, and there's a lot more companies taking action. But the good news for potential graduates out there is there's a lot more companies that do not have this role as yet than currently do.
Very good. Excellent. Adele, do you want to tell us a little bit about your contribution to the program?
Yeah, so I would do module 2 of Tangent. So my course would be kind of focused more on the academic side compared to Brian's. So it's a little bit heavy in theory. Some people love that. Some people are not that happy about it. So I would be looking a lot around, what is organizational culture? How do we create an organizational culture? What are the well-being norms within organizational culture? The role of leaders within that culture. And also, not only do we look at a social level, because at the end of the day, organizations are kind of in the area of social psychology, because we are kind of looking at group behaviors, but then we also go into a little bit individual behaviors, with the idea of how do we change people that don't want to change or that resist change. So we kind of look, because that happens in organizations, a lot of people will go through the change, but some people might not. So how do we manage that group of people? It's also kind of important to understand. And then we look at measurements of, how do we measure well-being? How do we manage change within organizations? So this year, one of the tasks was to actually, pull organizations through a change process, which you might think it's very simple, but it's actually really, really complex, and you have to think about a lot of different details. But I think it gives you a real good insight into, how complex well-being is, and it's not all that easy.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So very much an applied learning experience in the course with strong theoretical underpinnings. It's a postgraduate level 9 certificate in workplace wellness. Takes place over roughly 24 weeks. The next intake is this September. Applications are now open, so visiting www.springboardcourses.ie and searching for Tangent or Workplace Wellness, you'll find the program there. You can also go to the Tangent website by Googling TCD Tangent. You'll find more information about the course there. You can speak to our student recruitment team also. I would recommend, if anybody's interested, anybody who's listening or watching this session is interested, that they do apply early. There's considerable paperwork that you need in terms of your application. So do start the conversation with us early in order to get all of that together to get your application in. This is quite a popular course, and yeah, don't be disappointed. Get the applications in early. I'm just taking a look at the chat there, and I noticed that Paul, chat was disabled. Please provide a host of well-being. Oh, right. Data is king. What metrics or how can you really measure well-being pre and post program delivery? That's an interesting one. So in an organizational setting, data is king. What metrics or how can you really measure well-being pre or post?
I go back. I was going to say, Adele, sorry, go back. What's your organization's kind of key drivers?
Yeah.
What are the leaders? What are they looking to see in 1 year's time? What are they looking to see on a screen when you're presenting back on how the year went from a well-being perspective? Like, are they interested in talent attraction and retention? You want your metrics focused on that. Maybe it's just the ROI. How much did we invest in this? And give me some financial data. And maybe that's their driver. And accountancy firms, maybe I know, might be interested in that. Or maybe they're genuinely interested in the health behaviors, health outcomes of our population. Are we getting healthier? Are we being more active? Are we less stressed? So understanding that, because if you're trying to capture everything, certainly at the beginning, you're probably setting yourself up for failure. You need those targeted metrics, so understanding that, and then work back from that. Get your baseline, and then you have something to work towards at the end of the year.
So clearly defining the outcomes, Brian, first, and then
Yeah.
you'll understand what you want to measure. Okay. And we have another question in from Matthias. What would your advice be to move away from the old one way fits all philosophy towards creating new methods for each employee to optimize their performance at work and grant them wellness? I'll just read that again. What would your advice be to move away from the old one way fits all philosophy towards creating new methods for each employee to optimize their performance at work and grant them wellness? So
I think what he's trying to go there, I think Matthias may be correct as if we're getting this wrong, is how do we go from seeing all the employees as one thing rather than see each individual as unique? Is that what you're trying to say there?
I'd say so. Yeah, the one size
also
fits all.
drawn a strong sort of link between performance, I suppose, and wellness as well. So I wonder, is he saying that maybe that was previously organization's emphasis, whereas now to move away?
I think that's what he's trying to say. He said it. Yes, that's correct. Well, I think that's where the key of leadership comes in, and creating that ethical leadership, where you create that leadership that has a sense of empathy and compassion and, is there to serve people and not to be served. And it's creating that sort of leadership, because otherwise we're going to continue viewing people as just all having the same needs when people have very, very different needs. So, one policy is not going to fit everybody. One way of doing things is not going to be okay with everybody. That you might decide that Monday and Tuesdays everybody has to come into the office, but maybe one individual cannot come in Mondays because they need to go to hospital appointment every Monday. So, you need to really look at your staff and say, okay, how am I going to manage this as a leader? What are the needs of each individual? Obviously, I don't think any organization can make all employees 100% happy, but you can definitely try to at least, manage their needs at a 70-80%. So nothing is, there's also like the question is, where is the limit that the individual minds their own well-being, and where is it the organizational responsibility to actually look after the staff? So, every organization really decides what that line is. Well,
as the WHO say, it's a healthy workplace is a collaboration between the employer and the employee, not one or the other. It's that collaboration. They don't define the percentage, mind you, but it's the collaboration between the two.
Very good. Now, another comment just in there. Most of the interventions implemented in my organization mainly focused on individual initiatives, relaxation, mindfulness webinars, online get-togethers, behavior modification strategies. If this has become the culture of the organization, how can this be changed towards having a more holistic approach to achieve organizational well-being?
It's like the organization or the leaders saying that, sort yourselves out. There's nothing wrong with our kind of processes and procedures. So, it's a difficult shift, but if you could introduce something like even an approach like an ISO 45003 approach, a risk management approach, where you start by getting a small team in a room and understanding what annoys you about work. What are the you want to kind of try and define what are the psychosocial hazards here that really annoy people, and then maybe get the top 3, start there. And look, can we start working on each of these, the first 3 here, a working group, maybe work on each of the 3. And chances are it'll be stuff like how work is organized, maybe it's social factors at work. So maybe is there something we can do to tackle these in some way at an organizational level? And demonstrate we're tackling them as well, or we're trying to do something about it. I mean, even that can get people on board and get them interested and get them behind what you're doing. So have a look at ISO 45003 for maybe that approach.
Super. Thanks very much, Brian. Very good. Somebody was just asking for the Springboard course link, so I've just put the course page link there, and our course will be just live very shortly, so you can find it there. Very good. We're just at time, so I'd just like to say thank you very, very much to Dr. Adele Grazi from School of Psychology in Trinity, and to Brian Crooke from Workplace Wellbeing Ireland, and also our course lead on the PG Cert in Workplace Wellbeing in Tangent. So as I mentioned, the course applications will be open very shortly. Do apply early. Do get in touch with our student recruitment team if you're interested in the courses. If you've more questions about the program, how to apply, you can simply send an email to springboard at tcd.ie, and I'm just putting that in the chat there. So if people want to send an email with any questions about the program to that, we'll get back to you and help you with your applications. Very good. So thanks again to everybody, and for really, really insightful chat, and it's such a fascinating area. So guys, I wish you the best, and we'll be in touch again soon. And thanks to everybody who joined us online. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.